Hey everyone, if you saw my live stream from last week, you'll know that we're starting kind of more of a content schedule. So my goal is going forward is to have baseball related content Monday, college football, then basketball related content Tuesday, NFL on Wednesdays, NHL Thursdays, and NBA Friday. So thank you everyone for voting in that Twitter poll. Or not Twitter poll, excuse me, the YouTube poll. I appreciate it. It helped me figure out what kind of content we should generate during the week. So we'll get started Tuesdays here with college football data. With the conference championship games coming this weekend, there's a chance that there might be a shakeup in the college football playoffs. So in this video, I'm going to show you guys how to acquire a statistic that I think is important for measuring success in the college football landscape, which is EPA, or expected points added. And that just is a measure of how many, on a given play, how many points do you add to your team on a given play. So, for example, you're going to have a positive expected points added if there's a pass for 10 yards. On the flip side, it's going to be a negative expected points added if there's a sack for 10 yards. But on the flip side, in reverse, defensively, it's negatively affecting you if you allow a 10-yard pass versus if you get a 10-yard sack. So we'll get right into it. Our libraries today will be pretty simple. We'll do Tidyverse and cfbfastR. So shout out to the Sports Dataverse team for cfbfastR once again. We're going to load in our play-by-play data, so load CFB PBP 2023. Run it. Wait for it. So now that we got our raw play-by-play in there, we can then look at some of the column names. So sort column names, CFB PBP. You see we get a lot. And what we're mainly focused on is EPA and defensive EPA. But let's look at this. So we'll do teams, cfbfastR, load college football teams, FBS only equals true. And then we'll just filter where the classification equals FBS. Let's actually get the team name, so we'll just call it teams from the dplyr package, pull school, conferences, same thing, teams, pull, conferences. Okay. Or excuse me, pull conference. Okay. Now what we're going to do is figure out each team's EPA per play, offensively and defensively. And we can go on a week-by-week basis. That way we can adjust for that opponent. So, simplest way to do it, we'll just call this data frame offense, CFB, PBP filter, field goal ends equals 0, punt play equals 0, kickoff play equals 0. So essentially what we're doing is we're just removing special teams plays for this particular subset. And then we're going to group by the possession team, the week, the conference the offense plays in, the game ID, and the defense as well. And then we're going to do a summarize, get the amount of plays, as well as get the EPA. so the total EPA in this case. Ungroup our data set so that way we can mutate offensive EPA per play equals round EPA divided by plays 3. And then we'll just remove the EPA and rename our offensive plays as plays. Because we're essentially going to do the same thing as for defense. So let me copy this and just change offense to defense. Defense conference. This time we'll say defensive possession team first, possession team last. And then same thing. But now we'll say defensive EPA per play, and then defense plays. So when we look at it, we can see a good list here and their opponent for that given week and what they did in terms of offensively allowing plays. So now that we have that data, let's look at, in terms of creating adjustment, let's look at adjusting by conference as kind of like the base conference EPA per play. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the average of every conference, offense and defensively, across the whole season. So we'll say EPA off data conf, our college football play-by-play data. Same thing. We'll filter out special teams plays. And then we'll group by, this time the offense conference. And then we'll summarize our data to say the offensive league EPA, which is just the average EPA, NA.RM equals true. And now instead of saying EPA offense data conference, now we'll just say EPDEF, which is short for defense data conference. So now we'll get the of the league, except one thing I want to add here is the defensive possession team. They're all listed in a conference. Okay, so now that we have both, let's look at our EPA data. So how do we do this? First we got to think about, okay, we're going to join our data sets together and use what's available to us. So let's create a new data frame called EPA data, and we'll left join two things right now: our offense and your EPA offense data conference. By equals combine offense conference. So that way we get the league average of that particular conference. So the SEC's EPA per play within its conference. The reason why we use conference compared to the entire division, because there's a big significant difference in talent levels, right? Because someone in the SEC has a greater talent pool than, say, someone in the AAC or the Sun Belt, those kinds of conferences. So that's why we're adjusting for the league average based upon their conference and not the entire league. So now we left join by that. We'll do another left join, but this time the left side will just be a period because we're continuing on our code. And we'll say EPA defensive data conference by equals combine defense possession team. All right. A third left join. And this time it'll just be strictly defense. And this is where we will say defense. I do not mind the possession team or the defense conference since we already have that data set from the previous left join. Now we'll say, so we're just going to remove those two variables. And now we'll combine our defense by both game ID and the defensive team. So that way we have the defensive EPA per play. So now that we have that, let's mutate it. So given that we have each game, we'll create what's called like a game EPA. And so we'll just say game EPA, mutate, and we'll take the offensive league EPA from this line here that we left joined here, add it to the defensive league EPA that we had here, and then joined it here, or excuse me, here. So defensive league EPA. But we're taking the average of that, so we're going to divide that by 2. And then we're going to create adjustment factors. So the first one is the offensive adjustment factor. And we're going to say if else is.na game EPA. So we're removing games where they may play like an FCS opponent or a D2 opponent. We're not giving them any adjustments. They're not getting any bonuses. We're just going to leave it as is. And we're going to say if it's not NA, however, we're going to take that game's EPA, and since it's an offensive adjustment, we're going to subtract it from the defense's league EPA. So that's basically saying let's take an example like Texas, Alabama, right, from earlier this season. That game EPA from that game is going to be subtracted. So if this is from the perspective of Texas, we'll say Texas game, that game EPA will be subtracted from Alabama's conference, the SEC, their league EPA over the course of the season. If that's confusing, please leave a comment below. Like, I'm happy to help. But we're taking that and then creating that offensive adjustment factor and then doing the opposite for defense. But obviously, since it's if else, if it is blank, we'll just leave it as 0. Copy the same thing for the defensive adjustment factor, which is based upon the offense's league that they're playing against. So same thing, if else game EPA is not NA, do the game EPA minus, now this time the conference's offensive EPA. And then we'll say opponent adjusted offensive EPA equals offensive EPA per play plus offensive adjustment factor. And then opponent's adjusted defensive EPA equals the defensive EPA per play plus the defensive adjustment factor. So that way, like if Alabama's playing against Chattanooga's Chattanooga's not operative, but like let's say they're playing Georgia State, right? Their defense will actually downgrade. Or another example is like Oregon playing Portland State, right? They put up all these points, but they're going to get a downgrade adjustment because they're playing, 1, an FCS school, and 2, they're not going to get, even though they're a high-powered offense, they're playing against a weak defense. So we'll run all that. Now you can see we'll have double columns for week. That's fine. But we have for certain teams, so like LSU, we can see like their particular EPA per play that's raw, unadjusted. So like Georgia State would be a great example, right? 0.421 for that game. However, the Sun Belt does have a weaker league EPA, so it gets adjusted accordingly, if that makes sense. Except it gets adjusted to them positively rather than negatively because of the league that they play in. So now that we created that adjustment, let's look at the unadjusted EPA per play. So we'll create a new data frame called unadjusted EPA play. cfbfastR, filter, same thing, just remove field goals, punts, and kickoffs. And this time, we'll say, because we're only concerned about FBS teams, we'll say possession team in teams. And then we'll group by that possession team. Summarize plays equals N, EPA equals sum, EPA NA.RM equals true, removing those NAs. Ungroup, and then mutate. We'll do raw EPA per play since this is just the raw. Unadjusted, round EPA per plays to 3 decimals. We'll select 2 columns, so possession team and raw EPA per play. Cool? Cool. So I'll run that. Should get 131 teams. And so, like, not accounting for opponent, LSU has the highest raw EPA per play. Oregon's number 2, Georgia's number 3, Kansas number 4. Now, let's look at the adjusted EPA per play. So offense adjusted EPA per play. EPA data that we created. Filter. This time, again, we only want the FBS teams. And now we'll say mutate. Total EPA on the season is opponents adjusted offensive EPA times offensive plays. And then same thing as earlier, group by possession team. Summarize plays equals sum offensive plays. NA.RM equals true. And then the adjusted EPA, which is the sum of the total EPA. NA.RM equals true. Ungroup our data set. Mutate. Our adjusted EPA per play equals round the adjusted EPA divided by plays 3. And then we'll left join our data set with the unadjusted EPA per play. And it's simply by the possession team, which is just the offensive team. We'll mutate, create that difference, so adjusted EPA per play minus the raw EPA per play. So run that. And I forgot to put an equal sign instead of an exclamation point. So now we see this. We see LSU gets a slight bump because a lot of their games were in conference. And you can see they get about 0.04 points. South Carolina actually is the biggest benefactor here. Again, playing most of their games in the SEC plus playing Clemson it plays a role there. So looking at it this way, we can see like most of the SEC is up here, which indicates, yeah, it's more than likely to be the case because, again, the SEC is one of the toughest conferences in the country. So then if we look at another way, so again, LSU gets a boost, Washington gets a boost, Oklahoma gets a boost. Some teams that are up here in raw EP, like SMU, gets a downgrade given their opponents. But now let's look at the opposite side. And now we see here some of the weaker conferences are adjusted negatively because, again, the conference strength is not that great. So Toledo, Ohio, the MACtion, even though we're big fans of it for Tuesday Night Football, this is the case. So let's do a bonus code and finish this off. We'll add GT extras. Okay. And we'll do offense. Actually, let's add in logo. So team info, cfbfastR. CFBD team info. Year equals 2023. And then dplyr select. Two things, school and logo. So we'll run that. And now let's create a cool little GT table. So we're going to left join that data set that we just created. Team info by equals combine the possession team equals school. Continue on. So we'll select, change the name of school to being the first variable. There are 6 total, well, there's 7 total columns with the new addition. So the last one would be the logo, so we'll just say 7, and then we just want the adjusted EPAs and the differences, so 4 through 6. And then say arrange, negative diff, slice, so we'll get the first 5 rows. GT image rows, right? Columns equals logo. Image source equals web. And we'll say the height, if I can spell it right, equals 50. Create a little label. So calls label. Logo equals logo. School, basically just capitalizing all of these. Equals school. Adjusted EPA play equals adjusted EPA play. And then raw EPA play equals raw EPA per play. Cool. And then we'll add a nice little ESPN theme. Music GT theme, ESPN. And then we'll create a little tab header. So tab header title equals biggest gainers in opponent adjusted offense EPA per play. And then subtitle equals the 2023 college football regular season. Alright. And then we'll add some table lines. Cool. And then add a little footnote. Put whatever you want, but we're going to do footnote equals data CFB fastR, and then table is my Twitter. Okay. So now we have that. Run all that except I did not have an equal sign here. Now you can see here the biggest gainers in opponent adjusted offensive EPA per play. So South Carolina, LSU, Alabama, Ole Miss, and Arizona State actually had a big gain too. So cool way to look at it. This is college football right here. You can kind of see some adjusted EPA per play trends. That way the teams that play tougher conferences or tougher opponents in general get those boosts, so you can see different styles of EPA per play. So thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.